28 years later theory reveals the best way 28 days and 28 weeks' casts can meet. With 28 years later officially in the works, fans of the legendary zombie franchise are buzzing with one tantalizing question. Could the original characters from 28 days later and 28 weeks later actually meet? While the first two entries in the franchise were connected only by the Rage virus and setting, their stories remained largely separate until now. A compelling fan theory has surfaced that not only makes a reunion possible, but narratively satisfying and thematically rich. This theory hinges on a single idea: quarantine zones and the people hiding in them. A pandemic's timeline. The virus never died. 28 days later ended with Jim, Selena, and Hannah surviving long enough to see a possible rescue as the infection burned itself out in Britain. 28 weeks later picked up the story with the American-led NATO effort to repopulate parts of London, only to result in another devastating outbreak that likely infected continental Europe. By the time 28 years later begins, the world has had almost 3 decades to adapt, mutate, or hide from the virus. The new theory suggests that multiple groups of survivors, like Jim's trio and 28 weeks later's Tammy and Andy, were separated by failed rescue attempts, border collapses, or competing military powers. Each group has been forced to survive in isolation with no knowledge of the other's fate. Theory: the casts are hidden in separate, safe zones. The strongest element of this theory is that Jim and his group, as well as Tammy and Andy, were rescued by different governments or factions, and each placed in separate safe zones or underground facilities. These zones were created by nations scrambling to contain the virus and experiment with immunity, especially after Andy was shown to carry the Rage virus without succumbing to it. These safe zones may have been built by the UK government in exile, desperate to save important citizens and witnesses. This faction could have airlifted Jim's group. The US military, after the events of 28 weeks later, they may have extracted Tammy and Andy, possibly seeing Andy as a subject for biological study. Private corporations or global coalitions, groups with their own agendas, including vaccine development, may have sought out immune or silent carrier survivors. The theory posits that the world didn't collapse entirely, but rather fragmented. The people from both movies were essentially buried in time, waiting for their moment to re-emerge. The 28 years later plot that could unite them. Here's where the theory becomes cinematic gold. A new strain of the Rage virus emerges, airborne, or genetically mutated to be deadlier and stealthier. Humanity is once again on the brink. The only way to combat it lies in the blood of two people: Andy, the partial carrier, and Jim, who recovered from infection in the first film. A desperate scientific or military group could begin tracking down Rage survivors across the world, following ancient radio signals, digital black boxes, or even scavenged DNA from old blood samples. This could serve as the vehicle for the long-awaited reunion between characters from the two films. Imagine Jim and Selena, older, hardened, but still capable, being pulled out of isolation. Meanwhile, Tammy, now in her 40s, has kept Andy alive all these years, aware that his blood may be a ticking time bomb or the cure for everything. These groups have never met, but when they do, the collision of stories is inevitable and electric. Why this theory works so well. There are several reasons why this idea of separate safe zones and reunification is so effective for 28 years later. 1. Real-world parallels. The COVID-19 pandemic showed us the possibility of countries isolating themselves completely. This adds a realistic layer to the theory's foundation. 2. Character-driven drama. Jim and Selena's emotional scuzz, paired with